Welcome to Tales of Resilience, a podcast honoring the heart behind animal rescue. I'm your host, Jolene Feeney, a mental health therapist, lifelong animal lover, and founder of Zodipaws and Animal Rescue Hub. This is a space for real conversations with the people who care for animals when no one else can. From shelter teams and wildlife rehabbers to transporters, vet techs, and nonprofit leaders. We talk about the joy, the grief, the burnout, and the moments that remind us why we keep showing up. Whether you've lived this work or just want to understand it more deeply, thank you for listening. Let's get into today's story. This episode may include references of animal suffering and death, as well as themes of mental health, including suicide. Welcome to Tales of Resilience. I'm your host, Jolene, and today's guest is Dr. Megan Gottschalk, founder of Bradford Second Chance Rescue, a veterinarian-owned nonprofit dedicated to helping animals in need of medical care, reducing overpopulation through accessible spay and neuter services, and helping animals find their forever homes. The rescue was founded in honor of Bradford, known as Brad, the dog who changed everything. Brad's life began with uncertainty. Found as a stray in Camden County, New Jersey, he moved through multiple homes before finally finding his permanent family at the age of 7. But Brad's story didn't stop here. He went on to travel across the country with Dr. Megan through multiple states, cross-country road trips, and the long journey of veterinary school. Along the way, he helped foster more than 50 animals, becoming the example of what can happen when an animal is given a true second chance. Inspired by Brad and her lifelong passion for rescue and shelter medicine, Dr. Megan created Bradford's Second Chance Rescue to help animals in need of medical care, support community members helping animals in crisis, and expand access to spay and neuter services. So, welcome, Megan, and thanks for being here today.
Hi, thank you so much for having me. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. It's always fun to hear it back. Bradford Second Chance Rescue officially was opened in August. That's when we got our 501c3 approval. Of course, I've been doing this unofficially for quite a while, but kind of figured, why not pull the trigger and make it official? Brad passed away last December, so once I decided to make it official, I was like, what better name to name it after and have his legacy kind of, continue on. So we are completely foster based, meaning we do not have a facility. That has positives and also some challenges going with it. So we can only save as many animals as we have foster homes for, which, sometimes can be a little bit challenging. We definitely get many more requests for animals than we can say yes to. But the dogs and cats that we can save are definitely in the best of homes in the time that they're with us. So that's kind of the general overlook. In the beginning, we tried to focus more on, neonates and that kind of stuff. Obviously, kind of depends on the season. Kitten season's usually springtime, so that was a little wild last year before we officially opened. So far, we've been mainly focusing on dogs. The Tri-Cities area in Washington is definitely pretty underserved, so we tend to go out there. We haven't looked out there, they just tend to come to us. So, that's kind of our thing right now. So that's usually where we get our dogs from, or from locals that are, requesting assistance or found a dog, so on and so forth. Cats are usually more local, whether or not it's someone, online saying, hey, we found a mom outside with a litter of kittens, or we found this lost cat, what do we do? So, it really just depends on the time of year as to what we have. Right now, we only have one mom and kittens, but 'tis the season. It will be ramping up soon. But yeah, that's kind of the gist as far as medical care. Obviously, I'm a veterinarian, so we handle most of it. I have an amazing group of volunteers, both veterinarians and technicians, that help do all of our crazy spay neuter days and all of that fun stuff. So we enjoy, helping the community as much as we can. Medical cases are kind of our forte because we do have the opportunity to treat them in-house, which is nice. So that is kind of the overall gist.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So when for people who listen, because we do have some listeners that are across the country, which is awesome.
Sure. Yeah.
But Tri-Cities is obviously what is that, 4 hours away?
Yeah, it's about three and a
Yeah.
half hours into Eastern Washington. So it's kind of bordering one of our more like rural areas. And we do have some
Mhm.
reservations out here too, where dogs are a little bit more, free roaming. Unfortunately, because there's more room and less population out in Tri-Cities, it has become a very popular dumping ground, which is usually where we get involved. So, people who don't want their animals and don't go through proper resources, decide that they just are going to become outdoors, and then people find them, they're not doing well, and then that's kind of where we come in, as long as, another rescue in the area, can't take them, won't take them. So we try to give kind of the locals the first come, first serve kind of situation. But there's so many animals and not enough organizations. So yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And so are you guys driving out there to get these animals? Are they being transported to
Yeah.
you or?
A little bit of both. Usually it's
Yeah.
us driving out there. I'm very, very fortunate. A local dog trainer and a good friend of mine actually really loves driving. So her and her husband
Oh.
have been kind of our local go-tos for transportation. They have a nice big van and lots of dog kennels. So that's been kind of the go-to. At one point, we were meeting people halfway. We still try to do that, but oftentimes, that's not an option. So they will drive the entire way, usually get
Mhm.
lunch and then come back. So yeah, we are very, very fortunate to have some pretty great people on our side.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, tell me a little bit about yourself and your history with animals. Have animals always been a part of your life? What does that look like?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the old story holds true. Yeah. Since day one, there hasn't been really another option. I've
Mhm.
had animals pretty much my entire life, through everything. So it's really something that I don't ever think I'll be without. It's one of those things when people are like, "Oh, I've never had an animal," and I'm like, "I doesn't register in my brain." So, it's one of those things I've always had, dogs and or cats. So yeah, it's something that it's pretty much only ever really been the option of what I wanted to do, and
Mhm.
we made it here somehow, some way. So
Yeah.
yeah.
How did you make that decision to become a veterinarian?
Yeah, so, of course, obviously, love for animals stems from all of it. Growing up, both my parents are Army reserves. So medical stuff has always been one parent was a medic, the other one fixed medical equipment. So everyone was kind of in the
Mhm.
medical field. Always loved like a Criminal Minds, Law and Order type shows. So was never, quite squeamish or anything like that. So from day one, I was joked around. I was like, maybe I'll be an animal control officer. And my parents were like, I don't trust you around people who do that. And I'm like, yeah, valid. So, that was always an option too. But yeah, I mean, since day one, it's been kind of the one-track mind. And I was, I think, 17 when I got a job at a boarding facility. So, people go
Mhm.
on vacation, board their dogs there, all that. Thought it was just a regular boarding facility. Ended up also boarding rescue dogs and cats. So long story short, kind of started getting involved there. My boss was a godsend, and she just helped me do anything and everything I wanted. So once she realized that I had, the passion for the medical side of things, it was basically her and I just running the show there. So we did a lot of that. She got me involved in a lot of local, spay neuter facilities, and I was their volunteer surgical assistant for a while, and that really
Mhm.
just kind of solidified everything. I was like, yeah, this is it. Like, I love surgery. I love doing all of that. Like, sometimes you have to see the odd parts a couple times to make sure that that's what you want to do. And it just made me more excited. So I'm like, I guess here we are. There's no other option.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think that that's know, for animal lovers growing up, I think they always could think, could I be a veterinarian?
Hmm.
And then there's obviously the really bright side of the work, and then there's the
Hmm.
not so bright side of the work that can really
Absolutely.
deter a lot of people
Yes.
from pursuing that.
Yeah. No, for sure. It's definitely not all sunshine and rainbows, but I still think,
Mhm.
it's a wonderful career choice as long as you see the whole picture. A lot of
Yeah.
people are like, "Oh, puppies and kittens." And I'm like, if that's what the goal is, it might not be for you. But, I still obviously there's a lot of positives, but there are days where those are hard to see sometimes. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So are you still working in a clinic? What does that look like? What is
Yeah.
the day to day?
Yeah, so my life's a little chaotic, but all for the best. So yeah, I work full time at a private practice. So I
Mhm.
work 10-hour shifts Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and then I oftentimes will pick up either full service clinic shifts or just vaccine clinics for local Petcos around the area. And then in the middle of all that, somehow we do the rescue stuff. So kind
Mhm.
of just, depends. Usually we're running one rescue surgery day a month. So typically we usually aim for like Saturday afternoons after the clinic closes. We kind of open and do all that. But yeah, that's kind of what we're doing. And then, benign medical stuff, vaccines, all of that kind of scattered throughout the week. So yeah,
Yeah, very busy.
yeah.
What was that process like from moving from the kind of informal work that you were doing to formalizing
Yeah.
the organization in August? What was that
Yeah.
like?
Yeah, I mean, I always kind of joke around. It was a 5-year plan, and happened in 3 years. So it's usually how that works. But it was challenging for me as far as being the face of something public. It's not in my DNA to be center of attention. So having like making the website, having my picture everywhere was definitely a little bit of an adjustment. And even just the recognition for it, it's definitely not obviously why I got into it. So having people comment on it is it's hard to take compliments sometimes, so I'm just like, okay, here we are. But it's something that has grown exponentially since we started, way more than I anticipated, so I can't
Mhm.
say I'm mad about that, but definitely is leading to some personal growth for me, being kind of public and everyone kind of
Mhm.
knowing who owns it and where we are and what we're doing. So yeah, I mean it was kind of in the works for a while, and then I don't even remember what changed, but something happened, and I was like, we're pulling the trigger. We're doing it. We're
Mhm.
submitting everything. And so yeah, we submitted everything to, IRS, government, all that fun stuff, and they were like, yeah, go for it. And we were like, I think there was part of me that was kind of like, yeah, there's no way it's going to go through. Something's going to come
Yeah.
up, and it's not going to work. And then they were like, yeah, here it is. And I'm like, oh, okay, here we are. So yeah, it's kind of how it began.
Okay. And what would you say are some contributing factors to your guys' ability to grow Bradford Second Chance so quickly?
Yeah, I think it's a couple of different things. I'm absolutely so thankful to have a great, great support system. So one of my kind of childhood friends from back home in New Jersey is a graphic designer. So she's come in big time with helping, the website and business cards and all of that fun stuff. So I'm very, very fortunate to have her on my side. And then, I mean, honestly, like my full-time clinic has just been amazing. So they're super helpful. The team of fosters that I have some people that are like, I don't even care what it is, give it to me, let's go. And I'm like, I love this. Obviously my partner's huge in this, very supportive of everything, which is lovely because I'd probably be single forever if I hadn't found him, so that's good. But yeah, I mean, so many people, you know, I'm not gonna lie, there's a lot of bad that you see on the side of things, yeah, how people dump dogs and do all that, won't even try to understand. But the nice part is you also start to see some of the good. We started kind of doing random stuff like putting an Amazon wish list out there just to see if there was traction. I haven't bought puppy food in months, and it's just been amazing to have,
Yeah.
the people that can't foster, because of course, not everybody can welcome animals into their home, which is totally fine. But giving them other opportunities to help has shown big time. And, again, before making this official, I didn't get that side of it. So it was, I was a little jaded because all you saw was, hey, I can't keep this dog, or hey, this dog was abandoned, and so forth. And so, it was hard. Like, once you got the dog adopted, the adopters are super grateful. And that was like, a little bit to keep you going. But having, the public really kind of come through and even like show up. We had a brewery event and I was floored. I didn't know half the people that were there. And I was
Mhm.
like, I didn't even know how you knew about this. So just having, people spread the word and do all that has been really, really cool to see. Um, and again, even just helping with anything on the Amazon wish list is huge, but the food has been amazing because God knows these puppies eat a lot. So that's been super helpful. So yeah, I
Mhm.
mean, I think a lot of it's word of mouth. I think a lot of it is, people love animals, thank God, or else we wouldn't be here. So very, very grateful for that. And eventually the good starts to outweigh the bad a little bit, which is what the hope is to continue to see. So yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. What do you think are some maybe common misconceptions that the public has about rescue work,
Yeah.
or, I mean, even I mean, even as far as even starting an organization, but what do you think are some common misconceptions that you've run into?
Yeah, so I mean, I think a lot of things, people get confused with shelter versus rescue and all of that, and even the different kinds of quote unquote shelters and humane societies and all of that. And so I think kind of starting there, there's already confusion right off the bat. And a lot of people have opinions about local shelters. And my opinion is if you can't go help the animals, you shouldn't really have an opinion. So, municipal shelters kind of get the bad reps of, having to euthanize for space, which thank God on this part of the country, not super prevalent. When I was in Tennessee, it was every day. And people, especially down in Tennessee, were like, oh my gosh, how could they do this? They say they love animals, so on and so forth. And I'm like, what are you doing to help? Nothing. So at that point, they don't have a choice. The city says you have to keep your doors open. And if you don't, you can't run anymore. And so if you can't close your doors and you can't adopt animals out, you don't have another option. And so I think there's a lot of common misconceptions from the shelter standpoint as far as that goes. And even like over here, like Oregon Humane versus Multnomah County and everything like that. Oregon Humane's not a municipal shelter, so they are allowed to say no, and they do absolutely amazing work. And they're allowed to say no if they can't take something on. A lot of people don't understand that and think that it's just a free for all. You have to take everything because you say you love animals. And so I think that's a huge misconception. And in rescue work, it kind of goes into a little bit more of a nuanced situation where people don't necessarily understand the difference, especially being such a small organization, being foster based. I get people reaching out multiple times a week saying, hey, X, Y, and Z, this dog is super aggressive, and my only other option is to euthanize it. And I'm like, I don't know how to help you with that. Like, I can't put a knowingly aggressive dog in a home. Like, I just can't. And, I think it's really hard, especially with behavior related stuff, for people to make a decision to say goodbye. And sometimes it's necessary, unfortunately. And so that's a whole other topic of conversation. But I do think it's been something that's hard for me to do as far as, say no to owner surrenders, particularly because I know that
Yeah.
they feel like this is the last option. But I also have to A, look out for the safety of my fosters, both human and their resident animals, but also, the longevity of this organization. Like if we start being known as, oh, I fostered for that organization and the dog bit me,
Mhm.
that it's
Mhm.
always a risk and people know it. But if I knowingly bring in dogs like that, it's going to become a hard thing to continue on. Um, so I do feel like, people don't always think it through. So, we got a plea to take on a like 11 or 12-year-old dog after the owner passed away. The dog is riddled with cancer. And they were like, yeah, will you take this on? And I'm like, do you think that's the best option for the dog? It just lost its lifelong partner. It can't be around other animals. It's selective with people that it likes, and it has cancer. Like, do we really think that's the best option?
Mhm.
And a lot of people don't get that. And so I think the hard part is, you have to think about the quality of life and the welfare of the animal and the people involved. And so that's where it gets a little bit complicated. And there's a common theme of people saying like, you're just picking and choosing who's adoptable and who's not and blah blah blah. And to some extent, we have to choose, right? Because, there can't be a dog in a foster home for a million years that ends up being an adoption. That's not what they signed up for. So we do have to kind of think of, you know, if you try to get me to take a dog that has aggression toward every other animal, some people, and has been a kid, it's not maintainable to take on animals like that. And, it's really difficult. And that's why I do try to take on some of the animals that others won't, like the medical cases. I can handle that. We can
Mhm.
take care of
Mhm.
that. Is it really, a lot more work for me? Absolutely. But, is that something I'm willing to do because I have the skill set to do it? Absolutely. We had a dog in Portland that someone posted and it had an awful skin condition. And I saw the
Mhm.
picture and I was like, I know what that is and I know how to treat it. Like, let's do it. And so she gave me the puppy, and within 5 weeks, it's perfectly fine in a new home. So I'm happy to take cases like that if we have the fosters and the resources to do that. So it really just kind of depends on, the situation at hand, who we have as far as fosters. The other thing, people are like, well, you took a litter of puppies 6 weeks ago. Why can't you take one now? And I'm like, my foster needs a break. Like people can't foster litters of
Mhm.
puppies back to back to back and still remain sane. So I
Yeah.
think there is a misconception as to like, well, if you don't take this one, but you take this one, you're picking and choosing when it's not that simple.
Mhm.
So I think there's a lot of that going on. A lot of issues with pediatric spay and neuter, which has been, a big thing for us too. Obviously, just like shelters, we don't adopt out intact animals. As much as I would like to believe that people can be reliable, life has shown me they can't be a lot of the time. So, we do spay and neuter usually around 8 to 10 weeks old. And, will people bring up the studies that show that, there are some studies showing that joint development can solidify after that time point? Absolutely. And, is it something that morally I was kind of teetering on for a minute? Yes. But at the end of the day, overpopulation is such an issue that spay and neuter is just not even a question. It has to be done. So, I think everyone's entitled to their opinions, but at the end of the day, we have to do what's best for the animals in the population. And I think that can be, hard for people to understand as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I appreciate the thorough response, and I wonder what that is like to field all of those opinions
Mhm.
that people have. Like, how does that impact you? Obviously, as a veterinarian, you're faced with tough conversations with people on a regular basis. Like, is that
Mhm.
something you get prepared for in school? Is that something you just have to learn? Like, how do you stay resilient or stay
Mhm.
able to continue the work given all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I think a couple different things. My school was definitely a little bit more progressive as far as, what they're teaching and how they're teaching it. So we had a lot of animal behavior classes, which has been super helpful. And so that's something that I kind of inadvertently specialize in, I guess, is
Mm,
behavior stuff. So a lot of the owned animals who come to me have behavior problems, don't like being handled, that kind of stuff. And, we have different techniques and different strategies to make those animals comfortable. As far as the actual conversations go, again, my school is very progressive in that. And we did actually have a class where they would hire the general public to be actors. And I mean, people could cry on command, people would scream at you. And I'm like, this is wild. So and they would videotape you, so you got to see yourself clicking the pen anxiously, and I'm like, no. So they prepared us a lot for that. I mean, I
mm,
think a lot of the rest of it is experience, unfortunately. I did minor in psychology in college. I like brain chemistry. I like knowing how people think and why they act the way they do. So I do feel like I have a little bit of a leg up on, dealing with those conversations. And, again, I don't expect everyone to agree with what we do or how I say it. And that's just kind of life. You're not going to agree with everyone, regardless of what the topic is. But I do feel like one of our, biggest jobs as veterinarians is to educate the public. And, all you can do is educate people. And if they don't want to believe that or listen to it, that's totally up to them. Um, and I think kind of letting that set in at some point, probably the first year out of school, it was just like, okay, you have to give the information, and then mentally you have to kind of take a step back and not take their response personally. And that is definitely a learning curve, but it's a great skill to have. I mean, there's plenty of clients that get very upset over things that I have no control over, and sometimes they just need someone to yell at, and I'm like, you know what, I'm here. So if you need me to be that person for an hour, I can be.
mhm,
Obviously within reason. We're not just personal punching bags, but there are a lot of people that are like, you guys got in it for the money. And I'm like, where's this money you talk about? I would love to see
mhm,
some. But again, a lot of it is learning when to be transparent and when not to be. I had a really hard conversation with a man about a year ago now. His cat had a urinary obstruction, which is fatal. It's, probably one of the least favorite of most veterinarians. And they can survive it. You can go to emergency surgery, you can go to the ER and get hospitalized for 5 days, and it can happen again in 6 months. And at that point, you can get a reconstructive surgery to basically make your urethra different so it doesn't happen for tens of thousands of dollars. So a lot of people can't. And that's something that is just the crude truth of it. And so we had this guy come in very upset. He didn't understand, why this was happening, why it was fatal if not treated, did not have a lot of money. And by the end of it, agreed that euthanasia was probably the best option. The cat was not brought in until it was, slightly too late to help. So, a decision was made to say goodbye to him. And the owner was very distraught at the prices that it would have taken to help this cat. And he was straight up was just like, why? Like, why? Where's the cost coming from? And I told him, I was like, do you really want to know? And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, all right. So I sat down with him and we went through everything. And I told him, I was like, none of my techs get paid enough to even have a house by themselves. I guarantee you don't want to know my student loan to debt ratio.
Mhm.
I was like, I promise it's not great. And so by the end of the conversation, he really was like, okay, like I get it. That makes a lot more sense. And like totally calmed down, wasn't yelling anymore, all of that. And so some people just want the numbers, they want the logic. And, sometimes you have to be willing to do that and kind of be vulnerable enough to tell them how much student loans I have and all of that. And I'm okay with it. I think the general public should know to some extent because, again, we're not in it for the money. Prices go up in a veterinary clinic every year, just like they do everywhere else. The lab charges us so much, equipment price goes up, drugs go up, all the things. So I think that's a huge thing. And just being able to be like, we don't disagree and that's okay. And if you want to go elsewhere, you're absolutely welcome to. I
Mhm.
think being able to tell people you don't know is a huge issue. There are a lot of people who feel like they have to know all the answers. I'm happy to tell you I have no idea why your dog's blood work looks like that. I'm happy to figure it out. I'm happy to go, talk to a specialist and go down some more rabbit holes of research and figuring it all out. But I'm not going to pretend to know it all because no one does. And I
Mhm.
think transparency is usually the best option with a lot of people. I always joke around like the person who thinks they know the most usually knows the least. They think they do, but they don't. So I think transparency all around, whether it's educating on, why things are the prices they are, why can't animals live forever? God, I wish I could answer that one. But, it's a lot of transparency and a lot of being able to remove emotions from it. You can be
Mhm.
transparent and some people don't care and they're still mad and that's okay. So
Yeah.
a lot of that, but yeah, school helped, life helped. So, a lot of times you just kind of have to experience it. And I feel like once you experience it in the productive way of being able to kind of get someone to calm down and realize how to talk it through, then it just blossoms from there. I have a lot of clients that got fired from other practices and da 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 da. And I'm like,
Mm.
let's chat. And not all of them work out. I'll let you know. So, but a lot of them are like, okay, that makes sense. Like, then thank you for admitting you don't know the answer to this. So that's definitely been a huge, huge step in, making relationships with people and educating them properly.
Yeah, absolutely. On the topic of cost,
Mhm.
because it is, I guess, a growing topic of conversation of medical costs
Yeah.
for animal care going up and up and up. Even frustration about venture capitalist companies kind of coming in and kind of planting their flag in certain organizations. What is your perception of that? Do you have thoughts or feelings as far as
Yeah.
any of that
Yeah.
goes?
I have lots of feelings and thoughts. um, yeah, I mean, I think there's a time and a place for everything, right? A lot of the corporate companies practices, a lot of people have lots of feelings about them. I think they all have potential. And a lot of the times it depends on the individual clinics, right? Usually it's an overarching company and there's multiple individual clinics. Some are great, some aren't. And I think the hard part is you don't really know that until you go in. And so, it's difficult to know from my perspective with what I'm doing. I currently work for a private practice and it has been a breath of fresh air. It has been so amazing. The owner is amazing. And I think the reason it's going so well is because she's right next to me working. Like she's still
Mhm.
seeing appointments, she's still doing, the day-to-day stuff. And I feel like that makes it much more realistic on how to keep your company happy and keep people around. I think corporations have a lot of positives as far as, usually they are able to pay more, and that can mean a huge difference for people who are, supporting a family, starting out of school, all of that. Um, but sometimes they lack that connection of they don't really understand what's going on in the day to day. And some of them really try, but it's just you can't. If you're not there, you can't understand that on a day-to-day basis. Um, and again, some corporations are great. Some hospitals under not so great ones are still great, but it just really depends on what the priority is. If people want super low cost, you might find one, you might not like the care you get there, but who knows? And so I think that is kind of a difference with them is it just depends. There's so many corporations now, it's hard to even keep track. Um, but again, from a pay standpoint, they do normally pay more. So a lot of, vets and stuff obviously we're not all in it for the money, but we all have lots of student loans to pay back. So unfortunately,
Mhm.
it has to be a thought. A lot of people have families. I don't have human children right now, so that is one thing I don't have to think about.
Yeah.
But it's a lot to kind of weigh the pros and cons of everything. Like if you're familiar with a company because you worked there when you were in vet school, it can even it's the devil you know versus the one you don't. So sometimes
Mhm.
it's easier to do that. I think, again, from a rescue perspective, I'd be hard pressed to find a corporation that would allow me to do what I do after hours. And I think that's been a huge plus for me. Half the time my boss is right next to me doing it. We did a spay neuter
Yeah.
day for our other local rescue and she was right there. So I think it's in a general concept, it's easier to find people who are in it because they strictly care about animals at private practices. I don't think that that means that corporates don't have that. I think they just, because they're so big and there's people above them, they have to think about other things sometimes. And that's just part of the game. It's not, again, it's not anything that's their fault personally, but when there's a bigger, thing at hand, they have to think about more things than if it's just one practice and we have to worry about what this practice is doing. Um, so I think that's kind of part of it. I know a lot of people from a medical standpoint get a little irritated at some of the corporate practices. They'll put numbers on how many pets you have to see a day, do that kind of thing. You can only use X, Y, and Z drugs. You have to prescribe X, Y, and Z in house and not. And for me, I'm like, I have enough to think about. I don't need that. So for me, again, I got very, very lucky to find the place that I'm at right now. And I think there are some really amazing corporations out there, and there are some really great corporate practices. There are a lot of kind of like fused ones now where they're like half privately owned, half corporate. And I don't blame people. The market's awful. Some private practices don't have a choice but to sell to corporate if they want to stay alive. So I don't blame them for that at all. And again, there are some corporations that are lovely. So it's just kind of hard for some people to kind of differ and go into one of those or another. Um, Again, a lot of them do have time limits on how long appointments are and so on and so forth. So I think that makes it difficult specifically for the animals who have behavioral stuff going on. So I see a lot of dogs who don't want to be touched, which, unfortunately, I
Mhm.
have to touch them.
Yeah.
So it's nice to be able to take my time. And if we have to schedule an hour appointment, we do. Um, and because of that, I've had people follow me from practice to practice because guess what? Their dog doesn't try to bite me and they like that. So I'm like, great. Or the dog does try to bite me and I still do it. So I'm like, that's okay
Mhm.
too. And a lot of people, not everyone feels that way. They're like, yeah, my dog tries to bite, we'll hold him down to the ground and get it done. And I'm like, yeah, I'm not the one for you. Like, we'll work on
Mhm.
cooperative handling. If I have to sedate them, I will, but we're not going to do that. There's obviously fear free is a huge thing right now. And I think it's amazing. Do I think it's possible every second of every day? Probably not. I do a lot of work with feral cats, and if you try to burrito wrap them, you might die. So, those guys, unfortunately, it's just not going to happen. But luckily, it's just you spay and neuter, and then they go back outside and have a great time. So those guys don't really fall into that category. But it's a lot of teaching people, which is hard. A lot of people are like, "Oh, I'm getting into this because I love animals," and I'm like, I hope you're okay with people too, because there's a lot of those. So,
Yeah.
a lot of teaching. I'm a huge component of muzzle training dogs. Both of my dogs are muzzle trained. Neither have ever tried to bite anyone. It's a good skill to
Mhm.
have. You never know. What if something happens and they get in an accident and they're in pain? Dogs bite, it's just par for the course. People are like, my dog would never bite. I'm like, your dog has teeth. It can still bite. Whether or not it
Mhm.
will, never know. But I think it's a huge thing to work on cooperative care, cooperative handling. A lot of vets, including myself, will do happy visits where reactive dogs will come by to literally just say hi and get treats and then go
Mhm.
home. So next time they
Yeah.
realize that, okay, I don't get poked and prodded every single time I go there.
Yeah.
Um, and it's becoming a huge thing across the country, which is awesome.
Hmm.
We love to see it. And again, it just depends. Some people owners don't care about that. And they're like, I just want to get it done. I'm like, you'll find places that'll get it done, look
Yeah.
around, but I'm not that person. So it really just depends. And it's different. When I was first being trained, I had to be that person for a minute, there wasn't another option. And so, you learn how to, but then as you continue in the field, you learn different ways of doing things. And even at my local clinic, I've showed a lot of them different ways to restrain large dogs that don't want to be restrained. And a lot of it's tricking them into thinking the pets are just pets and they're not actually getting ready to hold you if you try to bite someone. But it's different. There's so many different ways to do stuff. There's so much research coming out. In back in the day, you scruff every cat you see to hold them still. And now, we're realizing that's not the best option. Do you have to do it at some point for safety? Sure. But, it should not be step one. It should not be the main
Mhm.
goal. And I've had so many cats that I can vaccinate with no restraint with them eating treats and they don't care. A
Mm.
lot of animals don't care about being poked, they care about being held. So it's been, a huge learning curve for everyone. And, there's so many success stories. I actually videotaped one and posted it because he was just the most amazing thing ever. It was at my previous clinic and they followed me to my current one. But this dog, the first time I saw him, came in almost non-responsive. And I was like, what's going on? And they're like, well, he had to have this amount of sedatives to be seen at the previous clinic. And I was like, no, like that's not acceptable. Like his heart rate is bordering on concerning and I don't like it. And so next time they came back and he was on half of that. And, he's a special dog. He didn't like a lot of things and that's okay. But by the end of it, he unfortunately had a couple different issues on blood work where he had to come back almost weekly for blood draws, which was super fun. But they had him basket muzzle trained and they had a cone on him, like a post-surgical cone, just in case he wanted to whip around at somebody. That hit first, which is a huge thing that you can do instead of muzzles, because if dogs are not muzzle trained, they tend to cause anxiety. I'd rather
Mhm.
be hit with a cone than a mouth. So, that's always fun. But at the end of the day, you run the risk. Like, has this dog bitten multiple people? Yes. Did it bite at its last clinic? Yeah. Did it bite the owner? Yes. So,
Mhm.
it's hard to know, but by the end of it, we kind of joke around. He wanted consent, which is so if you showed him what you were doing, he would not
Yeah.
react.
Yeah.
So he had a harness with a handle on it. I was the one restraining him every time he entered the building. My one tech fed him treats, and we had to place an IV catheter on it. And we got a video of him. Literally, my technician showed him each piece of what we were doing. He showed the catheter, the tape, the vet
Mhm.
wrap, everything. And that dog stood still eating with not a single reaction, without any sedatives on board. And it was just like the owner was in tears. It was like the most eye-opening experience for everyone, including people at the clinic who hadn't seen it before. And, it just doesn't have to be that way. And don't get me wrong, not every dog can do that. Some need a lot more
Yeah.
than that. But
Yeah.
I mean, he was case in point what happens if you actually just watch body language and adjust to it. And so, a lot of dogs don't need all of that stuff going on. Um, but a lot of owners are resistant to oral sedatives for some reason. And so I think that's a huge misconception that is getting better. I think, from a human standpoint, since mental health medications are becoming a little bit more accepted, so are sedatives for dogs. Um, and even if they're not, some dogs, we need it to touch the dog or else somebody will get hurt. And so those are not optional. There are other dogs where we can do it and we can do it without him trying to bite, without them doing anything crazy. But you can tell by their body language, they're really anxious. And so I had one last week that I just from experience was like, they're gonna say no to the trazodone. I just know it. And I told him, I was like, he did great. Like we got it done, but there was a lot of panting. His eyes were really wide. He didn't enjoy his time, obviously. And I was like, I think this would help just kind of take him down a couple notches to make him slightly more comfortable next time. And they were like, oh yeah, absolutely. Like if that makes him more comfortable, we'll definitely take it. And I'm like, okay, we're getting there. Not everyone is so against this.
Mhm.
But it just depends on who you get. And we've definitely fired clients that were like, yeah, I'm not giving that to my dog. And I'm like, then this isn't the place for you. We're not going to have four people sit on your dog for a nail trim. It's just not going to happen.
Mhm.
But, a lot of cooperative care handling, a lot of trainers in the area are starting to do, you can train a dog to do a chin rest on your hands so they can keep it there while somebody looks at the back end. A lot of touch commands to have them go up and kind of show their face to a new person. And so there's a lot of work going into it. And there's always still, little hills we have to climb over. I had a dog that loves to eat things it shouldn't. And I was like, I think it might be worth muzzle training her, and having her in a basket muzzle so that she doesn't eat the rocks off the ground and end up back in surgery again. Um, and the young boy in the home was horrified at the idea of a muzzle. It was like, let's chat. Like it's not that bad. Yeah, I know it can look crazy. And yeah, at one point in life it was for the dogs that are going to bite people. But now it's so much more than that. If that means your dog doesn't need a third abdominal surgery, it might be worth it. And so for me personally, I muzzle my dogs and I take them out in public. And I was joking I was going to make them a little vest that said, "Ask me about my muzzle." I'm like, let's talk. Um, but I think leaps and bounds we've come, we still have a long way to go. It really just depends on what that individual person views as, appropriate stereotype versus not. And so I think we're getting there, but it's still a work in progress for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I can hear just the cornerstone of education that goes into
Mm,
this, but also the level of compassion and patience that you have for the animals, but like you said, the people too, which is
yeah.
key to be able to, it sounds like, kind of help people turn the corner on certain topics that allow them to kind
Hmm.
of, I guess, regulate their emotions
Yeah.
probably around some
Yeah.
things. So, yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah. Um, I like to ask people, since we do talk about resilience on the podcast, how they would personally define resilience.
Mm.
How would you define resilience?
I think for me is more of a, determination and doing achieving the goal despite things getting in your way and despite it not being easy. Um, I think in my experience, the most resilient people and animals have usually been through the most. There's a lot of things that can come your way, and a lot of people saying, "Yeah, it's not going to work. No, you can't do that," and then doing it anyway. So sometimes I think resilience can go side and side with being stubborn and not wanting to listen to other people. So I think, it's a lot of just doing things despite the world giving you reasons not to.
Hmm. Where do you feel like your resilience comes from?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a mix of a couple different things. I childhood wise, there's a lot of ebbs and flows. My dad got deployed in the military a couple times, had to kind of go through some stuff with that, divorces, all of that fun stuff. So I think, that kind of starts the floor a little higher on that. But it's hard. I mean, school's hard. I have been diagnosed with ADHD when I was in elementary school. Medications did not go well. Had some pretty severe side effects. So ended up saying, we're just not going to. Um,
Mhm.
had to develop some pretty interesting strategies to kind of get around that. You got to figure out your own brain, which is a little harder to do than you think. Um, so, I think it's hard. You go through phases, especially as, a preteen teenager, where you're like, I don't want to try harder than other people. Like, that doesn't seem fair. Um, but you get to a point where you're like, well, I want to go to vet school, so I don't really have that choice. You kind of have to be more stubborn than your demons, I guess. And, throughout high school, everyone's like, you must be so good at school. I'm like, oh, no, I'm not. I am like, academics are so not my strong suit. High school was not great. GPA was not great. And my high school advisor basically was like, don't try. You're not going to get in. Like, your
Mhm.
grades aren't there. Your strategies aren't there. You're not trying hard enough. And I was kind of like, well, screw you. In the nicest way possible. Looking back on it, based on
Mhm.
paper, heck yeah, I wasn't getting in. Like, I don't blame her whatsoever. But I think that was, a little bit of a push to be like, I need to get it together. I had someone in my life say, I think you can absolutely go to vet school. I don't know if
Mhm.
you will. I don't know if you will put in the work to get there. And that was like a little slap in the face, but a little like fire under my ass at the same time. So I was
Yeah.
like, okay, maybe. Um, and I think it's hard. I think there's a lot of people that are like, I don't know if I can. And the only way to do it is to try. In college, I busted my butt and it was hard. It sucked. I mean, I had tutors in almost every class. I was in office hours every week, and it sucked when you looked at it in comparison to the person next to me who slept through class and got straight A's. And I was like, that sucks. But at the same time, it's like, you know what? It is what it is. Like, I can't change the outcome. Comparing myself to someone who has it quote unquote easier is not going to help. And I don't know what's going on in their personal life. Maybe they don't have it easier. And I
Mhm.
think that's kind of a lot of kind of what got me through. And then, I didn't get into vet school my first try. Not a lot of people do. It's a
Yeah.
hard task to get in. My GPA was fine, but fine isn't good enough for a lot of places. My experience kind of got overpowered, like everything overpowered the experience because they were like, wow, you've done X, Y, and Z. And, as far as getting into vet school, you have to be aware of what they want, right? And I knew they wanted grades, and I knew that wasn't my strong suit.
Mm.
Was I a B and a couple A student? Yeah, absolutely. But was that good enough? No, not for a lot of places. And, so I did a lot of stuff on the side. I did so much volunteer work, and then I worked at a vet clinic throughout too. And, it's a balance. You can't work so much that you can't focus on school either. So, finding that balance, and then also being a college student, you still have to be able to go out and live life a little bit. So, very strict balance. I got waitlisted by a couple different schools the first time, plenty of rejections, too many to count. I was one of those people that was like, I'm stubborn, I'm going to apply to like 18 schools. It was a lot of money to apply to 18 schools, might I add. But
Mm.
I got rejected, straight out rejected by I think 10 right off the bat. And I was like, wow, what a hit. I'm like, that feels great. But it's one of those things where I'm like, you know what, you're lost. We're moving on. Like, I'm not going to sit here and dwell on it. That's not going to help anything. And I always joke around. I'm like, I think everyone needs to give themselves a couple days to feel their feelings, hate life, blame whoever you want to blame, and then get over it and move on. You can't dwell on
Yeah.
it forever. And then I got waitlisted by a couple schools, one of which was Lincoln Memorial down in Tennessee. And I was like, I love the outdoors. It's always been my kind of home away from home. And so I was like, Tennessee sounds like a great place to be. And I got waitlisted there. And then I got an email from them that basically was like, hey, like, you're waitlisted, but there's this program here and it's a master's degree. And it is a good transition for people to come to this
Mm.
vet school after. So I decided to do that, and it was amazing. I've met some of, my best friends there, and friends throughout vet school, after vet school, everything. And then after I did that program, we applied and got in. And so it was a journey. And at that point, it
Mhm.
was, that's where Brad comes in. So, he was at the rescue for a year and a half before I adopted him. So every time I would go home on breaks from college, I would see him. He was not the looker. He was definitely, we joke around, he had the face that made people scared of dogs. He
Mm.
just didn't have a lot of expression at first. Which was kind of what drew me to him. He wasn't drawing the eyes of a lot of people, but yet he, was the dog that never, had an accident in his kennel, never destroyed anything, never started a fight, never. And I was like, that dog piqued my interest. Um, and so during that time frame when I went home on breaks, my mom is very tolerant of my nonsense. And so
Mhm.
her rule of thumb was, you can bring animals home as long as my house looks the same as when I left. And I said, okay. So I would bring dogs home constantly. We'd go on little field trips and do all this stuff. And, I brought him home one day and he was just like, I don't know what's going on. This is weird. And that was after, at the kennel, just straight up ignoring me. He just wouldn't even acknowledge my existence. And I'm like, what is wrong with that dog? So my theory was ignore him back. So
Mm.
after my shift, I would go into his kennel and sit on my phone and just completely ignore him. And one day he just kind of looked at me like, what are you doing? And I'm like, we're just sitting here. And then I brought him home, and that night I was laying on the ground. He came and put his head on my like chest, and I was like, "Yeah, we're done. It's done." And so he was definitely a big factor of everything, of course. Um, but I got into the master's program, and I went home and I sent paperwork, and I said, "We're adopting him, and he's coming with me." And everyone was like, "What are you doing?" And I was like, "What?" And they're like, "You're gonna go adopt this 75-pound pit bull mix that you've never really had outside of a kennel and drive halfway across the country." I was like, yeah, we're going to. And it's going to be great. My mom and dad thought I was absolutely crazy. But you know what? At that point, I'm like, I'm an adult. I can do what I want. So, adopted the dog and left. And it was awesome. It was the most amazing experience. Like looking back on it, probably not recommended to the general public to do such things, but I got very lucky and, he had the time of his life. He was great in the car, didn't care about anything. We got down there and that was gone. It was history. And he's just the most amazing dog. And, everyone's like, oh, pit bulls, they're aggressive and blah, blah, blah. Every dog's aggressive if you give them a reason to be. It's not, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in breed restrictions. I don't believe in any of it. Do I think that people should have to go through testing? Absolutely. That would be nice. But, everyone's like, oh, he looks scary. And, I'll be honest, in the beginning, got super defensive. I was like, you don't know what you're talking about. Like, if you think that, then, you're just dumb and you don't have any experience, blah, blah, blah. And then as time went on, I was like, you know what? You think what you want. Like, I don't really care. And, when you're traveling across country as a single female, it doesn't hurt to have a dog that people inherently don't think is friendly with you. But I mean, I took him out and he was just the absolute epitome of everything. People were like, oh, like you must have trained him since he was 6 weeks old. And I'm like, no, I adopted him a year ago. I'm like, they don't have to be young to be great dogs.
Yeah.
And, the amount of people that asked me to breed him, which I'm like, first of all, the answer is always no. And the second of all, he doesn't have anything back there, kids. So
Yeah.
it's not happening. But, it was just kind of an eye opener. I'm like, this dog was sitting in a kennel for a year and a half after being surrendered for the third time, and there's
Mhm.
people begging me to breed him. Like it was just this like eye-opening experience of like, if you actually go to a shelter or a rescue and actually pay attention to the dogs, you might find something different. And so, I think that was just a huge thing for me where was it frustrating? Absolutely. Do we need more pit bull type dogs in the world? No. There are so many that need homes. There are dogs dying in shelters every day.
Yeah.
Breeding in general, if you're doing it to improve genetics, if you're doing it for a working line dog, if you're doing it responsibly, go for it. If you're not, don't. So that's kind of where I stand on that as a whole. But,
Yeah.
pit bull type dogs, absolutely not. They're the most amazing. They'll be my favorite to the day I die. We don't need to be breeding them. It's just that simple. But I mean, when I was down there, it's like he went everywhere with me. We were inseparable. And everyone was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe a pit bull's this nice. And in the beginning it was a lot of like, oh, I have real strong feelings about what you just said. But then I'm like, again, could I turn this into a teaching experience? And I did. And so many people were like, wow, I didn't know that pit bulls could, be this nice, could walk this well on leash, could live in an apartment and do all this stuff. And I'm like, yeah, they can, and they're great. He was funny enough, he was kind of like the mascot for my first apartment out there because they had
Mhm.
just opened, and so many places wouldn't allow him,
Yeah.
whether or not it was size, breed, whatever. They were like, no, it's not happening. And I refused to make any exceptions for him. So it was funny at that point. Someone was like, go online and buy an emotional support letter. I'm like, no, I refuse because he should be allowed there. And if they can't allow that, I don't want to be there. And people were like, you're being a little crazy. I'm like, you know what? Call me what you want, but I'm not doing it. And then it's like, oh, call him a lab mix. No, I'm not. Does he probably have boxer in him? Maybe. But, I'm not going to sit here and lie and then show up and then be like, what the hell?
Yeah.
So the first apartment complex, the landlord, of course, I emailed them and was like, do you allow animals, blah, blah, blah. And he was a really, really nice guy who just bought this, complex from someone and was like, you know what? Until someone gives me a reason not to, yeah, they are. And I was
Mhm.
like, okay, point taken. Of
Yeah.
course, paying pet deposits, doing all that, completely understand. There are irresponsible people and there are accidents that happen. So I get that. But by the end of it, he was like, Brad's like the epitome of a perfect dog in an apartment. I'm like, I know. And it's hard, you can't believe every tenant that tells you their dog's perfect,
Yeah.
but he really was perfect in a house. And so it was funny, he would sit in the window and watch people walk by. The UPS man would leave him treats. He hopped in his truck. Landlord would come by and just knock on the door to say hi to Brad. Nobody wanted to say hi to me, just Brad. But again, like he was really just that dog that was bomb proof. And he was labeled as dog aggressive when I got him because he had an unfortunate experience at his previous house, which everyone admitted it was no fault of his, but the homeowner association felt otherwise. So he, the door was left open by someone. He went out. He was not socialized properly at all. So him and his 75-pound body thought that playing with other dogs meant throwing his body weight at them.
Mhm.
Never aggressive, but God knows it wasn't pleasant. And he found this little white dog that was being walked and really wanted to say hi, jumped on it, and caused some pretty severe injuries. The owner of that dog said, there was no aggression. As soon as her dog, yiped, he backed off and sat down. Um, so it was one of those things where, he wasn't at fault, but the HOA was like, I don't care. So, it was a lot of training him from the start of like, okay, playing with other dogs does not mean you jump on top of them. And he got a couple good bites and he never bit back.
Yeah.
He was awesome, but he didn't get it. He's like, I don't understand why you don't want me to just jump on you. Like it's so much fun. So a lot of, training on that kind of stuff. But once he like got adjusted to a dog, oh my God, he was amazing. The world's most confident dog. Everyone's like, what did you do? I'm like, I didn't. It's a secret. I did nothing. I did a lot of work with him with other dogs outside of the home, but bring a dog inside. He was bomb proof.
Mhm.
He did not
Mhm.
care. He taught me a lot about behavior because his behavior was not normal. Not a lot of dogs want other dogs in their space. He loved it.
Mhm.
He didn't really
Mhm.
want to meet them outside. He wanted them in his home, which was weird.
Yeah.
His body language inherently was strange. He loved making eye contact all the time, which was not normal. So, there's a lot of learning involved. But his confidence, I mean, you could see these foster dogs just looking at him like, are you reacting? Should I react? What's the plan here? And immediately they would just settle down. Like he was like, no, it's good. Like we don't have to worry. And so he was absolutely amazing, in that capacity. Um, but yeah, I mean, he got me through the master's program. He got me through vet school. We brought him to a lot of the labs for handling because he was just bomb proof. Like you
Mhm.
could do whatever to him. Even after I graduated, I love teaching people, and I especially love people who want to be in the vet field. So, I have a lot of brand new assistants, a lot of people who want to come into this medicine. And I would throw him out there for all to see. I was like, yeah, go take a jug draw on him, go poke and prod. And they're like, really? I'm like, he doesn't care. I'm like, he is totally fine. And till the day he died, he was like, I put a catheter in him at home with nobody else. Like he did not care. I think a lot of it's trust. Like he knew, okay, she's not gonna let them hurt me.
Mhm.
It's not gonna end that way. And so I think a lot of it is, building trust with those animals, and a lot of it just falls into place. Once he realized that like he's stuck with me and he doesn't really have a choice, he was like,
Yeah.
okay, like why bother, and a lot of our bully breeds tend to be a little bit more stoic too. So of course that's a genetics component of things. But yeah, I mean, everything was, changing all the time in vet school and everything else. And he was the only consistent part for a really long time. And so that helps a lot, in an ever changing world. I was in vet school during COVID. That sucked. So, a lot of things didn't go as planned, but he was always there. And so that definitely like, helped get through a lot of different things. And I think he opened up a lot of people's eyes as to, you don't have to go get a 6-week-old puppy from a breeder, walk to the shelter or rescue and see what's there. And it's not always going to fit. And I don't think that's bad. A lot of people are like, oh, do you hate breeders? I'm like, no, I don't hate breeders. I
Mhm.
hate people who are doing it irresponsibly. That, yeah. But, I think there's a time and a place for everything in every breed. I don't think, will I ever buy a dog from a breeder? Probably not. Just because, I've seen the ones that you don't have to buy from a breeder, and they still are amazing. So,
Yeah.
if I was going to train a dog to be a bite dog, yeah, I'd probably buy it from a breeder because that's a little specific from a genetic
Yeah.
standpoint.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I think, you know, whether or not, because everyone's like, oh, like, hey, would you have gotten through it without him? And I'm like, I don't know. And the good news is I don't have to find out. So
That's
that's the fun part. But
yeah.
but yeah, I mean, the whole journey of vet school is hard. It's not a fun time. Once you get in there, it's a lot easier from a school perspective to do something you actually care about versus, the prereqs in college and all that. But, I think it's a challenging field to get in. I think it's 100% worth it if you know what you're getting into.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, in hearing your own story of resilience and Brad's story of resilience, there's just like several words coming to mind. I was
Mhm.
thinking, clearly you have conviction and passion
Mhm.
that I think propels you forward, patience, perspective. So I think those are all really nice qualities to help stay resilient in these kind of spaces. So
Yeah.
that's really awesome. Well, thank goodness for you, and thank goodness for Brad, and certainly the team of people that you have and that you're continuing to build, and the momentum that you guys are creating. It sounds really awesome, and I'm
Yeah.
so glad to be able to highlight Bradford's Second Chance Rescue. If people felt compelled after hearing your story that they want to jump in, they want to support you, like what
Hmm.
are some avenues? I know you kind of talked to it a little bit earlier, but what are some avenues of that people can support what you're doing?
Yeah. First and foremost, fostering, of course. It's the absolute mainstay of everything we do. We also understand that not everyone can do it. It's not easy. A lot of people from an emotional standpoint have a hard time with it. My train of thought, people are like, how have you not kept all of them? And I'm like, the more I keep, the less I can take on later, right? So that's always perspective. And it's nice, I can adopt animals out here and I can still keep tabs on them and see how they're doing. So fostering would be huge. If people are interested in fostering, all supplies are included. Kennels, food, bowls, leash, all the stuff. Every animal is examined on intake for medical and behavioral assessments. Um, Vaccines on intake, flea and tick prevention, dewormer, all of that fun stuff. Of course, we're pulling these dogs from not so great situations. So we cannot tell you that it's going to be an absolute perfect health and they might not have an intestinal parasite running around. Everyone that's coming from that area has Giardia because they just love it. So,
Mm-hmm.
it's super treatable, not an issue. But, sometimes it causes diarrhea, which isn't always
Yeah.
fun. So it just depends. And I think, a lot of people who either have experience with fostering or are really passionate about it realize that it's not always easy, right? You're taking these dogs from a really stressful time. A lot of them are really shut down. We do a behavioral evaluation in the beginning. They may flip that 180 in a week once they start opening up. You don't know. I have, knock on wood, not had an issue with any aggression with humans whatsoever.
Mm-hmm.
I have had a dog that did amazing in my home with my cats, completely ignored them. Went to a foster home, did not do amazing with their cat. Everyone was fine, but it was
Yeah.
scary. The
Yeah.
foster was like, I cannot do, I'm like, I do not blame you at all. I'll take the dog back
Mm-hmm.
at a heartbeat. Um, and that's the one thing with fostering that I really, harp on is it's not, if it's not a good fit, it's not a good fit. I ask people to try to commit to 1 to 2 weeks just because it is hard to find other fosters. But obviously if it's a situation like that where, there's almost an attack or, someone's going to get bit, something, obviously, please, I'll take it back at the drop of a dime. But if it's, you know, it had one accident in the home on day two. Yeah, I'm going to ask for a little bit of leniency for them. They're might have not even been potty trained if they were living outside, or they might just be so stressed that they're finally letting their guard down. And, some accidents happen.
Yeah.
So, a lot of that kind of stuff is to be expected. All of my fosters have been absolutely amazing and so understanding with that. And most people are. I prefer to be kind of overly honest than to have someone be surprised by something like this. But yeah, fostering would be huge. Spreading the word about fostering is huge. And a lot of people feel like, oh, I can't foster, I don't have a fenced-in yard, or I have a small child, or I already have a dog in the home. None of those are deterrents for us. Every animal is going to be different. I got a 75-pound pit bull mix and lived in an apartment, and he was great. It doesn't, not having a fenced-in yard for a lot of dogs does not mean that you can't foster them. It doesn't mean that they have to be on leash outside. Absolutely. But, that's not the end of the world. So, I think we try to be, really realistic when it comes to this because the unfortunate truth is the more, specificities we put on everything, the less fosters we have. Um, we think it's great when there are children in the home. We obviously try to test dogs as much as possible before that. And we're completely honest. I don't know how this dog is going to do. I was told by Joe Schmo's cousin that it lived in a house with animals and kids and it did great. I wasn't there. You
Yeah.
can only trust as much as you can see. And so, I tell people that, I was told it lives with a house with kids. Sounds like it went well. Do not trust them alone with your child. It's just,
Mm-hmm.
it is what it
Mm-hmm.
is. And, our foster contract says, you are not to leave these animals unalone, like unattended alone together. It's just not acceptable. Because, you never know. A lot of these dogs were out fending for themselves, trying to find food to eat. Yeah, they might be a little aggressive over their food if another dog comes up to them. We don't know. I assume they all are because I would be if that was my situation.
Yeah.
But and so many people are like, absolutely, I wouldn't even think of that. Like, people are so understanding, but, I don't feel like having, small children or anything like that. Obviously, if you have a 1-year-old baby and you're trying to foster a 100-pound dog, we need to have a conversation about what that looks like. It could be an accident and the baby could get hurt. But I have a lot of people who are like, hey, I have a 7-year-old who really wants to volunteer. How can we get involved? And I'm like, absolutely, let's do it.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's huge to get, kids involved. And, we pulled a mom and newborn babies last night, and the husband of the foster was like, I didn't even know people dumped animals in the state. I was like, yeah, it's not great. So, a lot of word of mouth of that kind of stuff is lovely. So, biggest thing is if anyone has questions about fostering or thinks they can't, ask us because they probably can. And even if it's not, any dog, we have dogs of all different backgrounds that need fosters. We have cats that need fosters. So, all of that is a possibility. Second to fostering, volunteering in other ways. We have a lot of dogs that need to get out and about. They need to go, we jokingly call them field trips. They need to go out. We had a volunteer last week and take one of our adult dogs to the waterfront in Vancouver and just walk around with a huge Adopt Me vest. And we got an application on her from that event. So, people are like, well, I can't take them home, so I can't do anything. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not true at all. Even if you want to come socialize puppies and just hang out in a room full of puppies that might pee on you, absolutely, let's do it. So there's a lot of other volunteer opportunities. Our fosters are amazing. They can't do it all. We have a dog right now who's absolutely a dream. Her name is Mango, and she's perfect. But she, when she first got here, she had babies. She was a little bit shut down, and she seemed super low energy, like she didn't even want to do anything. And now that she's settled, she's like, no, I'm kind of bored. Like, I kind of want to go on a walk. And the foster's like, okay, that's new. So we're trying to find, volunteers to help take Mango out on a walk so the foster doesn't have to. Fosters do a lot, and we try to help them as much as we can. So anything like that is hugely appreciated. Of course, the puppies can't necessarily go out and about until they're fully vaccinated, so they're a little bit harder to do. But next to that, donations, of course, of any variety. We accept any medical equipment, any, dog beds, harnesses, all of that kind of stuff. And then, of course, our Amazon wish list has things that we need to buy. So usually it's dog food, toys, that kind of stuff. Syringes are on there. Lots of liquid medications need to be given to puppies for dewormer. So those go really fast. So little things like that, collars that they can't get out of, obviously are a big thing. And second to, donations, just word of mouth, follow us on social media, share our posts. You never know who is going to reach. We have someone that's like, this person's sister's mom's son shared this thing and I saw it and I was like, cool. We do fundraisers that you don't have to do anything with animals if you don't want to, come out to the brewery, have a drink with us, just hang out, we've started doing apparel. It's a little bit more difficult. We're trying to not get too many, make sure we get enough to get rid of it too. But, apparel is huge. Anything helps. If, you go to this brewery every weekend and you're like, I wonder if they would pair with them for an event, ask them, give them our email. I would absolutely love it. And, the hard part is it's hard for me to do everything. I have a lot of people that are helping, but, at the end of the day, it's like I have this never ending list of tasks to do and, reaching out to them is on it. But if, someone else wants to step in and help with that, definitely not going to say no. So yeah, I think that pretty much covers everything we need. But yeah, that's it.
Yeah. Well, you've given a lot of awesome options for people. And I really like even just the ability to even help out the fosters, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really cool too, that you don't,
Yeah.
if someone doesn't have the ability to commit to fostering, that they can still support the fostering, which is cool.
Yeah.
So yeah,
absolutely.
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. Thank you, Dr. Megan, for sharing your time and your wisdom and your perspective today. And yeah, we'll keep spreading the word and hopefully keep things growing and help as many animals as you can.
Perfect. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you again to Dr. Megan Gottschalk, founder of Bradford Second Chance Rescue, for sharing her story. If you were moved by this episode, like, share, subscribe. Be sure to follow us on Instagram at animal.rescuehub and leave a review. Until next time, may we all find our own tale of resilience. Thanks for joining us on Tales of Resilience. If today's story moved you, reminded you of your own path, or gave you something to think about, please consider sharing this episode with someone else who cares. You can follow us on Instagram at zodi.paws and animal.rescuehub to stay connected, or visit zodipaws.com or animalrescuehub.org to learn more about both of these organizations. And you can also email us directly at info@animalrescuehub.org. And if you or someone you know has a story worth sharing, we'd love to hear from you. Until next time, be kind to yourself and never underestimate the power of a tale and a little resilience.